Hey everybody, welcome back to the Genus Brewing channel. We are here today talking about brewing myths.
These are things that you've probably been doing and not realizing that it doesn't matter.
So there's a pedigree of brewing from way back that tells you have to brew a certain way. You have to do a 60-minute boil. You know, you have to not squeeze your grain bag. Things like that. That probably don't really matter, and you can actually get a more efficient brew day and be a little
Hopefully
bit
more enjoyable brew day.
Exactly, yeah, why not? And be more calculated about what you're doing rather than just following the tradition of what people have been doing for a long time, and you brew that way because other people have. Anyways, we're going to be telling you why you don't have to do those things, so stay tuned and I hope you enjoy the video.
So to start out with, let's talk about hot side aeration.
Hot side aeration, one of the biggest taboos in
Oh yes,
homebrewing over the last 20 years. You hear all about hot side aeration.
So, and what hot side aeration is essentially anything that as you're warming up wort, as you're boiling wort, you're not supposed to agitate that wort at all to introduce any kind of oxygen into it, because supposedly that will ruin your beer. I don't think anybody's actually come up with a way that it will ruin your beer other than, I guess, oxidizing it.
Right.
But you're going to do that as soon as you transfer it into your kettle anyway.
Yeah, I think the idea is that, you know, on the warmer end of the spectrum, because you have such a higher energy system already, oxidative effects will take place more quickly because there's a higher energy system.
So.
But I mean, the counter to that, I would say, is because you also have a high energy system. You have things in the system that are pushing off water vapor that are they're expelling, they're expanding, and I've not personally experienced any effect from doing everything you are not supposed to do from hot side aeration.
And as a matter of fact, to even contradict this whole myth in general, there was a brewer in Germany that would actually introduce hydrogen peroxide into his mash when he was doing an all-grain mash in order to get higher amounts of oxidization, because it actually turns out having that oxidization will reduce polyphenols in the mash, ultimately leading to a beer that has less issues with clarity.
Right.
Technical sides of things, but
yeah, exactly. Yeah, let's go into really quick. I want to mention that, you know, as brewers ourselves, we are constantly pushing the boundaries of what you're not supposed to do.
Especially because we're lazy brewers.
We're very lazy brewers, and we have the fortunate ability to brew constantly. We brew all the time.
Exactly.
And so we have, you know, not only our own homebrew experience, we both have commercial brewing experience, and then we also have all the experience of all the people that come into the shop and want to try something new.
Well, on to the next myth is going to be a pretty big one, actually, and somewhat of a newer one a lot of people won't realize, and that is fermentation temperatures and brewing lager yeast specifically at warm temperatures.
Right, and big ups to Brewlosophy on this one, and we'll put a link to Brewlosophy in the comments below. But Brewlosophy does a lot of stuff in terms of dispelling a lot of these same myths that we experiment with regularly. But specifically with the 3470 strain,
which is a dry yeast strain, Weinsteffen lager strain, I believe, is its origin. And what was you saying about that?
Yeah, so the Weinsteffen lager, it's the Prodigal lager strain, so it's been around for a long time, and it's not until, I would say, the last few, maybe 2-3 years that people have really been experimenting with fermenting it at a warmer temperature. But being able, like the flavor differences between lagers and ales, fermenting at cold versus warm temperatures are very strain dependent.
They are, yeah. And this strain, what it kind of comes down to is people have found, specifically on Brewlosophy, that they fermented it in the lower 50s, and then side by side they fermented the same batch of beer at 70 degrees Fahrenheit and found no difference in flavor between it. Next experiment they actually did was they fermented it at, I believe, 82 just to push the limits, and while it did change the flavor at that point, a lot of the tasters actually preferred the flavor of that warmer beer, so that sort of really helps to, at least in my opinion, as a brewer, dispel some of that discomfort of especially summertime temperatures, getting a hold of beer and, say it gets up to 75 degrees during a fermentation, to be able to have that sort of lack of anxiety where you're not worrying about your beer being ruined by some 3-degree temperature change.
Right, and I mean, we, especially in the store, get a lot of people that come in during the winter season especially, and they're saying, here's the time where I have to ferment my lagers. If I want to do a lager, I have to do it now because my basement's going to be 52 degrees or whatever. So that's the time they have that temperature zone for themselves. Or they feel like they need to get a temperature controlled system. And there are yeasts, granted, that do need specific temperature control to make their exact flavor profile happen. But
a good example with that would probably be English strains. English yeast strains are notorious for either dropping out if they get too cold, say they get down to 60 degrees, and also producing some kind of off fruity esters if they start getting a little warmer. So that's something you just have to consider when you're brewing your batch of beer. Pick the strain based on what kind of temperature control you have.
And if you don't know your strains, ask your people at your local homebrew supply store about the volatility of the strain that you're using. On the English strain thing, there are certain strains, actually with a brewlosophy that just recently happened. They used the Fuller strain in yeast, that's 1968, and they fermented that at a variation of temperatures and didn't get a difference. I am very familiar with the Fuller strain, and that is a very effective strain at a range of temperatures. But there are other English strains which haven't been tested by brewlosophy, but we've used a lot of times, where if you ferment that at a clean, lower temperature, you'll actually be stuck with diacetyl. And so if you don't get that up into a higher temperature range, that won't clean up. Or if you ferment an English strain at too high of a temperature, you'll get extra fruity flavors.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things in just getting in terms of knowing your yeast that are really important with that. The blanket statement that you have to ferment lagers at 50 degrees, versus ales at 70 or 68 degrees or whatever. It's very strain dependent.
And even fermenting ales, this last winter I've fermented a couple of ale strains at 58.
Yep.
So, and they actually turn out great. Just takes them a few more days to finish up, is all.
Yeah. So that's myth number 2, is that all lagers are low, all ales are high temperature.
So let's go on to, our third myth. So third myth of today is going to be that you have to boil for 60 minutes. Obviously for extract, this is just straight up false. The only reason why you need to boil for 60 minutes is to utilize the hop oils properly, because they don't want to dissolve in water naturally. So by boiling those, you're able to utilize the oils, extract bitterness into your beer to offset the sweetness. But if you don't want all that bitterness in there, or if you just don't mind using a few extra hops, there's no reason why you can't boil for 5-10 minutes.
Yeah, especially with extract,
Another big thing people are worried about when it comes to all grain mashing is a chemical compound known as dimethyl sulfide. And what it comes down to is that is completely debunked now. I have done 20-minute boils, I've done 30-minute boils, and never have I got dimethyl sulfide in my beer. And I think you said something about malts having an impact on that. So what is that about? So,
I mean, there are still malts out there that will have a high level of S-methylmethionine, which is the precursor to DMS. And those are typically not highly modified malts. So those are going to be if you're using a Pilsner malt that's like floor malted, and it's not malted in a very calculated way where you're going to have the same malt every single time. You still run that risk. But today, in a lot of in the world of highly modified malts, most of your two rows, most of your even Pilsner malts, which are the lightest malts that you can get, if you're using something that's highly modified, like even Best malts, and they have I've used their Pilsner malt with this, I've used their Heidelberg malt, which is their one level bond, and it's like the super Pilsner malt. A short boil will still not have any dimethyl sulfide, DMS, that cooked corn, that vegetal flavor in it. If you're using a floor malted, very old world style Pilsner malt, you can still end up with that DMS flavor. definitely boil for that 60 minutes, that 75 minutes, 90 minutes, whatever you want to do. But with most highly modified malts, especially with the vast majority of your recipes where you're using two-row, American two-row, there's no risk of DMS in that, and you can boil for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and not have that character come out. And that's one of those things, like, you read so many recipes that are like, this is a 60-minute boil, and because every recipe before you've started brewing was 60-minute boils. That's literally the only reason that people do 60-minute boils.
And the other thing is, the argument, I guess, to this might be somebody saying, well, hey, though, what about, utilize or efficiencies for my all grain batch?
Right.
I got to boil that volume down. And the bottom line is, yes, you will lose efficiency. Will it change the flavor of your beer? No. The only thing is that you do have to consider that you might lose, 3-4% of your efficiency.
Right.
And
because you're losing evaporation. That's what you're sacrificing.
Exactly. You're losing evaporation, and realistically, this is probably any extra cost in grains is going to be more than offset by the gas that you're saving, because most of you are probably using a propane burner if you're doing all grain brew sessions. So
right.
It kind of has this sort of trade-off of like, well, what's it worth to you?
Right. So if you want to save time, feel free to do a short boil. So talking about tannin extraction, squeezing the bag.
Good Lord.
Don't squeeze the bag.
There we go.
So grab the bull by the cojones.
Turns out, doesn't matter. You can squeeze the bag, you cannot squeeze the bag. You're not going to get any tannins in your beer.
Get your extra sugars off of that. It's really, it's not going to make a difference.
Other thing is people getting tannins from over-sparging, people saying you can't have your mash above 170. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, mash above 170, it really doesn't matter. I mean, it takes a lot of over-sparging and hot water and alkaline water. Like, the combination of all of those maybe will get you some tannin extraction. We'll get you that extra bitterness.
And really, that's the bigger thing to watch for if you're worried about it is make sure that you know the pH, make sure you know the alkalinity of the water you're using. That's the only situation where you might run into that. And that would have a lot less to do with your water temperature and much more to do with the actual pH of your mash, having that rise too high. That's where you might get tannins. Otherwise, you're not going to get them from heating it up too much. You're not going to get them from sparging. For instance, decoction mashes are a perfect example. People worry about those, and yet decoction mashes, you're literally pulling out your wort and your mash, and you're boiling it. So if you're not getting tannins from that, it's pretty hard to extract them from other methods.
Yeah, so heat being an excuse for extracting tannins is really not it. It's really just pH is the most consistent way to extract tannins, and that's still very difficult to do because most of the time your grains buffer against pH change. So you have to really, really over sparge to start to pull off tannins, and you still have to be over sparging with high alkaline water, heavy bicarbonate, and it'll do it eventually. But for most practical reasons, it's not something to worry about.
Well, I think that's a good start for our series on homebrewing beer myths.
And we'll be doing a lot of these. We have dozens, I think, to go over. But I think this is a great start. So if you have any comments or anything that you want us to talk about in future videos on dispelling brewing myths, please comment below. Let us know. We'd love to talk about a lot of things. And like I said, we brew a lot. So we can, even if you want us to watch us experiment with anything, we can do it.
And if you want to see more myths get busted, definitely check out Brewlosophy's website. Like we said before, we'll put a link down. Major shout out to those guys, though, for kind of pushing the forefront of homebrewing methodologies.
Yeah, trying to get you to change your idea of what is needed in the brewing world, basically.
Other than that, we'll see you next time, and have a beer. Cheers.
Cheers, guys.
You talk so much.
You talk so much.
You talk so much.
You talk more than I do. Do we need to talk?
Shoot.
Yeesh. Yeah.
Devil's trying to crawl out of me.
What's the last one we talked about?
That ain't no myth.
Yeah.
This is what I get to work with every day. We take that mold and we break it into a million pieces.
Just shatter it.
all over the floor.
So today we're here to tell you.
And then we clean it up.
We don't. You don't clean up often. We make a mess, and it stays there.
And then your kids roll in it.
Yep. Well, let's try that again.